I figured it might help to do a little bit of background on where we've been and what we're working on now, and everything going on, as you guys mentioned, the Biden plan and reauthorization and so forth. We'll get into some of that, but I think it's probably helpful context for uh, the money that's on the ground right now in across the country, but obviously in Texas as well. So this is just a general side. I'm sure you all have seen this before from anyone from ARPA. We like to remind folks of why the federal program is important. This demonstrates, in each state, the share of a state's capital investment that comes from the federal program. So and this is for highways and bridges. The numbers are similar when we look at transit, in the sense of the federal share, but obviously different by state. But as you can see, Texas, about almost 40% of their program on average comes from the feds. The map slide is just a demonstration for everyone about almost like a reminder of what the reliance for each state is on the federal program, and so that was something that we like to include in our presentations to just show exactly what the context is, what we're talking about. In Texas, it's almost about 40% on average of the state's capital program when it comes to at least highways is coming from the federal government. So on the second slide that will pop up, in I think I talked for a while before I realized I was booted off, but one thing that we wanted to focus on or remind folks is some of the money that's going out right now that was in addition to the FAST Act funding that we were expecting when we got the 5-year FAST Act bill at the end of 2015. There have been starting in 2017 for the FY18 budget, but over the last 4 years, there's been budget agreements between Democrats and Republicans that allowed for additional spending. Basically, Democrats said we want extra money for domestic programs. Republicans said they want extra money for military programs, and so they cut a deal. And what we benefited a little bit from that deal that was cut. So when Jeff pulls up the slide, I'll show you. But basically, it shows that over the last 4 years or 4 budget cycles, we've gotten a little more than $10 billion in additional spending for highways, and another roughly $2 to $3 billion for airports, and some transit capital money as well. There's also been the Tiger Grant, Build Grant, and I think they changed the name again. I'm blanking on the new name, but some discretionary grant money that came through the appropriations process as well. So overall, on top of what we were expecting in the FAST Act, we've gotten over the last 5 years a little over $20 billion in additional capital spending, and that's national number. I've got a map that shows you the highway number for Texas that's coming. So while we didn't get the big infrastructure package that we were all hoping for when President Trump took office, and there were a lot of campaign promises made on both sides of the aisle on getting something done in that administration. Unfortunately, it didn't happen, and obviously we're in a good spot here in the Biden first 3 months of the Biden administration. But we did, I think it's important to recognize that we did get some additional funding. Jeff, did that come over?
Not yet.
Oh gosh. All right. I'll try and send that again. Well, let me try one more time.
Try sharing again.
Yeah. I'll try one more time. Let me just open it back up here. See if this works. All right, you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay. So this was the chart I was just talking about as far as the extra money that we've gotten over the last four budget cycles, and what has, and this is just the highway portion here. Like I mentioned, there's additional funding for highway or for transit and airports as well. So overall, about 20 billion on top of what we were expecting as part of the FAST Act. So, and here's a map that demonstrates that national highway number. So Texas has gotten almost 600 million on top of what they were expecting in the FAST Act, which, if I recall, roughly is somewhere in the neighborhood of a couple $1 billion a year comes from the feds for Texas. That's Texas's share of that. So, and then so that's kind of the annual appropriation side. Then in December, I think everyone's aware, state DOTs were able to get an additional $10 billion to help backfill some of the revenue lost as part of the pandemic last year. That definitely was something we worked a lot on with AASHTO and TxDOT in particular, but a lot of our partners, I think, spent a lot of time last year trying to help secure some funding for state DOTs and transit agencies around the country to help backfill some of the loss. AASHTO's most recent estimate is that they're still going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $18 billion short when it comes to when looking out through 2024 as far as lost revenue. I'll get into some of the state and local money that was included in the last package in a second, but this 10 billion is now out. We're starting to see projects being obligated and starting to hear cases where states are starting to spend this money. So if TxDOT isn't one of them, start pushing on them to do it, because there's no reason they can't. There was a little hemming and hawing at the beginning about getting guidance from DOT on how the money could be spent, what types of projects, et cetera. But all of that has been basically finalized, and so there's pretty much a pretty wide array of types of projects that TxDOT would be able to spend that money on. So I'm sure you all are already encouraging them to get those dollars out, but if you haven't weighed in, I think that would be helpful. And then the last plan that was passed in March, the American Rescue Plan, the 1.9 trillion, obviously had a whole host of other unrelated to transportation anyway, program funding and lots of money for hospitals and schools and tax credits and so forth. But as it relates to transportation, there was an additional 30.5 billion for public transportation included in that plan directly. So that brings public transit's number going back to the first COVID package, the CARES Act that was passed last March. That brings public transit's number up to somewhere in the neighborhood of almost north of $70 billion has been allocated for public transit. That, according to APTA, that should get them pretty close to what they need over that through 2023-24 number. We'll see how things shake out and how business returns to and how the general public could, if and when they return to taking public transit. But and then there was 8 billion in there for airports. Obviously airports, you all know this, have seen a dramatic economic decline. I think they're starting to come back online, but still not fully up to speed, and so the businesses that operate in airports have seen dramatic decline. So that was a welcome need there. As it relates to maybe most directly to capital and surface transportation improvements in particular, the 350 billion that was allocated for state and local governments, we actually just got the guidance on this yesterday. ARPA led a letter with the bunch of, I think it was over 36 national associations, including some of the state and local government groups, National League of Cities, Conference of Mayors, NACO, counties, and then AASHTO and some of the other construction related groups as well. But basically advocating that the transportation secretary, or excuse me, the Treasury Secretary Yellen, she was in charge of the guidance on this, but making sure that money was available and could be used for capital projects, including road projects. And the guidance came out yesterday in our favor, and so that was welcome. So now they have 60 days that the guidance is going to be open for comment, but states technically can start using some of this money. State and local governments can start using some of this money starting in the next few weeks here. So, excuse me. So having specific guidance say that the 350 billion can be used for road projects and broadband and water and all sorts of infrastructure is key, because we've heard all over the country from state governments on down to local little town governments that would like to use their share of the money on a road or bridge project that either they were planning to use or build but had to put on hold for the pandemic because of the pandemic, or would it be, in a lot of places, and I assume some places in Texas this was also the case, there were places that weren't as hard hit, that maybe didn't see the revenue downturn at the state and local government level that some other places may have. And so we've and the guidance was clear as well that those places could also use this funding on infrastructure projects. And so overall, we're in good shape here, and I think we're going to see state and local governments use, obviously depends on the place, and I myself sound to myself like a broken record because I say this all the time, but you guys know this as well. Every single place across the country is a different scenario in terms of how the pandemic affected them, and so you could have one town that was not hit at all, and then 30 miles away they did some shutdowns and so on and so forth. So obviously it's going to depend, and I would encourage you all to advocate to your local governments to if you can and if they can to use some of this funding for infrastructure purposes. We at the federal level have to walk a fine line here. Obviously we advocated for this and got the guidance we think we need. But at the same time, we don't want this to somehow become the infrastructure package. We don't think it will be, and that's not the direction the discussions are going right now. But we could start. If this money does go out, we start to see it be spent on some capital projects. We're a little concerned that rhetoric could pick up that hey, states and locals are using this money on infrastructure already. Why do we need to do this big $2 trillion, $1 trillion, whatever infrastructure package? So that's a little bit of a concern, but I think we're again, the discussions in DC are still moving forward on in recognizing the needs that are out there, and that even if some portion of this 350 billion, and then there's a specific additional 10 billion set aside for projects like broadband and water. But overall, I don't think we're going to have too much pushback on doing something big here. By and large, obviously there's folks on both sides of the aisle on the far left, far right that are going to have issues, but overall, I think we are setting ourselves up for an infrastructure plan. So, as everyone's aware, Biden administration proposed, and this is a pie chart that kind of breaks everything out, and I'm sure these numbers are all familiar to everyone at this point. But Biden administration put out their proposal a few weeks back. There's a lot of hemming and hawing again of about what the definition of infrastructure should be. This is what we calculated is the transportation infrastructure portion of the package. There's the highway and bridge number, 115 billion. I think some of these other pots are going to go towards highways and bridges, including road safety and the restoring equity part, which aims to kind of maybe repair or somehow fix some of the roadways and decisions that were made previously that had divided some of the communities. So I'm not going to read the pie chart to you. You all can see this. No secret the preference that I think the new administration has as far as types of projects. Public transit and Amtrak and rail. Combined is definitely more than some of the highway projects. Even though the needs on the highway side are somewhere the last CMP report, conditions of performance report that DOT put out, pegged the number somewhere around 800 to 900 billion in needs for highways, while public transit needed about 100 billion as far as backlog goes. So public transit number, if the Biden plan came to fruition, basically public transit's entire backlog almost would be dealt with, or come pretty close to it. Whereas obviously highways and bridges would be far behind what their overall needs are. But this is a negotiation, and we've heard from our membership. There's a lot of consternation and fear that this could look like 2009 all over again. And what we mean by that is that in 2009 with the ARA stimulus bill, the first words out of President Obama's mouth were, we're going to go and fix roads and bridges, put people back to work. Well, at the end of the day, about 2 to 3% of that money went towards roads and bridges. The rest of it went towards a lot of other stuff, which much of was important, I'm sure, and helped get us out of a recession there. But so the smaller number relative to the entire package on roads and bridges and some of the overall transportation infrastructure is a little concerning. I think it's important to remember that we're a couple things. One, that this is not 2009 as far as the economic situation that we were in then. As I mentioned earlier, some states did not even see a pullback as part of the pandemic. Some of them saw revenue increases actually. So we're not in the hole that we were in 2009. And then the second thing I want to make sure that we're thinking about this in the correct way is that excuse me, even if we had putting aside the arguing over the definition of infrastructure and what should be included in an infrastructure package, et cetera, you can see here, and this compares the House bill from last year, the Senate bill that was marked up in committee in 2019. That graph, the Senate ATIA bill that actually should read 2019. Sorry about that. But as you can see, in both of those bills would have been basically historic levels that we hadn't seen invested in highways over probably since 1997. I think would be the last one, and the House bill probably would be an even greater increase over that. But as you can see, the Biden plan had 115 billion for highways, not including some of that other money that I said probably would go into highways. 115 billion on top of a baseline level reauthorization. So that would be, again, historic level investment here, and obviously even greater historic level investment in transit and rail and some of the other programs that you saw in the last chart. So at the end of the day, we can argue about whether something should be included or not, but if the Biden plan were to come to fruition, we would be looking at a surplus of work for the next, 5 to 10 years here, because of that investment. So just kind of something to remember and think about when we're looking at this. So shifting towards kind of what's next, and you guys mentioned, I think Bob mentioned when in the introduction, we kind of have like a two-pronged approach here, and how they all fit in together is those decisions are going to be made here in the next few weeks. So reauthorization, September 30th deadline. Something's got to happen by then. Either ideally, obviously, a new 5-year bill, and then if not, some sort of extension. The committees are on track to make this a reality, to make the 5-year bill a reality. They both plan to mark up. Hope I'm not breaking any news here, but I would circle your calendars for May 26th is the date that I'm hearing for markups, actually, both in the House T&I committee and in the Senate Environment and Public Works committee for the highway portion of a surface bill. I'm hearing rumors, so don't quote me on that. It's kind of rumor mill stuff at this point, but they're looking at that last week of May, and in particular May 26th. So so that would keep them on pace, and Speaker Pelosi has said she wants an infrastructure package to move out of the House by July 4th. We expect any package that comes out of the House to look something like or resemble something like what passed out of the House last year, the HR2 bill. We expect that the T&I bill that comes out of that gets marked up that last week of May is going to look like the surface transportation portion of the HR2 bill last year. The Biden plan they could add some things to HR2 to make it look a little bit more like the Biden plan, but the surface transportation portion is largely we expect to look very similar to what the House passed last year. The Senate, again, EPW now with Chairman Carper in charge, working with Ranking Member Capito. We expect a bipartisan bill to come out of the Environment and Public Works Committee that last week of May. And so the Senate kind of forecast is a little bit murkier. We haven't heard strong timelines as far as when they plan to pass a bill out of the Senate. We're hoping, we think if as long as they get something out by the end of July, that will give staff and members the August recess, and then September to negotiate a final reauthorization bill. That's kind of the timeline. Now, question is, how does all that fit into the infrastructure package? As I referenced on the previous slide, the Biden plan had money in addition to a baseline reauthorization. The GOP counteroffer that they put out had the reauthorization as the base of their plan, and then it had an extra, I think it was about $50 billion for highways. They held transit funding flat, had some extra money in there for broadband, water, et cetera. So does the reauthorization bill come into and get combined with an infrastructure package is kind of the key question here. If it's a bipartisan product, which I think as everyone's aware that they're meeting regularly, Senator Capito and some of the other Republican ranking members in the Senate are going to meet with President Biden on Thursday. President Biden is meeting with congressional leadership tomorrow, and infrastructure is supposedly going to be one of the main talking or discussion points and how they move forward on that. So if a bipartisan deal is cut, it will likely be something a little bit more focused on what is kind of considered traditional infrastructure, and I do expect that if that is the case, that a reauthorization package would likely be included in that. So we've seen Republicans come up in the last couple of days to maybe somewhere in the neighborhood of about $800 billion, which obviously is great and moving in the right direction. So how this all shakes out, I think these next couple of weeks are critical to see how this happens. But if there is a bipartisan package, I do think the reauthorization is going to be kind of the core piece of that. If a bipartisan negotiations fail, then I think you'll see Democrats shift to the reconciliation process. That's the process, as I'm sure you're all aware now, and our Senate rules experts, like all of us, have to be these days. But reconciliation is the method that one party can move a bill through the Senate with only a majority vote, rather than needing 60 votes to overcome a filibuster. That can happen for infrastructure. Much of the Biden plan could pass through the Senate on a reconciliation type process. However, a reauthorization bill cannot. So basically, the way that the Senate rules work is that reconciliation allows the majority party to move a bill that only deals with taxing. The legislation can only deal with tax and spending authorities. It cannot deal with policy. So meaning they can't make changes to existing law that aren't tax and spending changes. They can only so a reauthorization bill with all the new policy changes that come with it would essentially not be able to go through the reconciliation process. So if the bipartisan negotiations fail, Democrats will use reconciliation to push through essentially a big spending package, and then probably some tax increases on top of it to pay for at least some of it. I doubt they're going to pay for all of it. Senator Manchin has already said he's not willing to go up to 28% on the corporate rate, for example. So, they need every vote. And so we're probably looking at more of a 24, 25% on the corporate rate at the end of the day. And so then the question is, if they do a reconciliation package on infrastructure, how do we got to make sure to keep the momentum moving forward on the reauthorization piece of this as well, because that's one fear I have, is that if the bipartisan negotiations falter, Democrats move a kind of one-time spending package that looks something like the Biden proposal, then is there the will and the oxygen in the room to do a bipartisan reauthorization bill, because it will inherently have to be a bipartisan process, because it will need 60 votes to get through the Senate. So a lot of ifs and questions to be answered there, but that's kind of where we're at here. I'll stop there and turn it over to any questions. And Jeff, I don't know if you want to moderate that, but yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. We really appreciate this. It's been very helpful. And what we typically do on questions is we'll ask people to post their questions in the chat or send them to me, and then we like to call on people to ask the questions. So that's what we'll do here, and we'll start with Dev Rastogi from AECOM. Dev, do you want to go ahead and unmute and ask your question? And if you've got anybody if you've got questions for Dean, go ahead and put them in the chat or send them to me, and then we'll call on you. So Dev, you're up first.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Dean. Actually, I had a few questions that you answered as I was typing my first question, which had to do with the intersection of reauthorization and all this infrastructure money. So appreciate that. But you mentioned that we'll start seeing some of this, American Rescue Plan money sort of start to flow, and I don't think we're seeing that or necessarily hearing it. And of course, we have a really strong public policy team here at the North Dallas Chamber that talks to our congressional representatives as well as our state and local, our local officials. And so we want to make sure we have the information to educate our officials on how this money can be used, because I don't think, at least I haven't heard any conversation around, allocating some of this money for important infrastructure projects. And so I was wondering if you mentioned that guidance was fairly recent, that just came out, and if there's a short document or something that you guys can share with us to as we talk to different people. And so that was one thing. And the other thing I'm curious about is the community funding, aka earmarks or whatever they're called right now. My understanding is that process is going to be incorporated into the FY22 budget. Can you tell us more about that process and how you see that fitting into, all these little pieces of the funding puzzle for infrastructure?
Sure. Yeah, no, great question. So as far as the FY22 process on earmarks, that is basically, I know in the House it's already closed. They have the Appropriations Committee, actually, I saw some numbers end of last week, already said, that they've received all the requests that they're taking, and I think I don't know if they released all the projects or the list of projects that were requested, but the number was overwhelmingly in the Transportation, Housing, Urban Development Subcommittee of where members were requesting projects. So I want to say it was 2.5 billion of the I think 5 billion total that was requested came out of that subcommittee. I didn't see how much was housing, how much was transportation, but I think a lot of it would most likely is going to be transportation projects. The Senate, I think, is still considering their process, and that process is still open. Not sure if any of I don't think Cornyn or Cruz are taking or going to be requesting. I think I know pretty positive Cornyn was against earmarking, recently came out against it, or maybe has been all along, but I know I saw something recently that he's against it, but and I assume Cruz probably is as well. But that process is still ongoing in the Senate. What it means, I think, for the annual appropriations process, I think it can help in actually for the reauthorization as well, and I'll get into that in a second. But I think overall, the earmarking process, as long as things stay in the up and up and everything's disclosed and there's a lot of transparency to the process, I think earmarking only helps kind of get things moving, whether it's the annual appropriations process or the reauthorization bill. And so the reauthorization, I know the House T&I committee, they have their own process that they're working through right now. The Senate is still trying to figure out what they're going to do on earmarks over there on the reauth bill. But on the House, members had to have their requests, and I think it was, if I remember correctly, about 20 million per member. They could request up to 20 million in projects. The project had to be on the STIP, had to be ready to go sort of deal. And that was another thing that there were obviously some high profile projects and some members that and lobbyists that got trouble last go around when we were doing earmarking. But the other part of it was that there were a certain segment of projects that never got built because they weren't ready to go, and a member of Congress would get a nice press release out of it and talk about this project that they wanted to build, but the state had no intention of ever building it, or locality, and so that money just sat there, and so that's one thing we definitely want to not have happen again, because I think that would also kind of leave a black mark on the give a black eye to the earmarking process moving forward. So I know the committee staff and the chairman, Peter DeFazio from Oregon, is really wants to make this as clean and transparent as possible, but also make sure that any earmark included is going to actually get built. So yeah.
Thanks, Deb. Thanks, Dean. Next question is from Andrew Reed with Burns and McDonnell.
Yeah, hey, Dean, good morning, and great presentation. Appreciate all the good info. I remember ARA, the buzzword of the day was shovel ready, right? Yep. And you conspicuously don't ever hear shovel ready with this package, and I think maybe for good reason that some of us are aware of. So you talked a little bit about once this passes, agencies can spend the money right away. Is there any sort of shot clock on the money that it has to be allocated within a year or 2 years or 3 years? Is there any back end, or how long can this money sit out there without being encumbered?
So are you talking about like if the Biden plan were to become law, or are you talking about the American Rescue Plan that went out in March?
Well, once the money starts flowing to the locals, is there any on the ARP plan?
Okay.
How long
Yeah.
do they have to spend that? And then also, I would ask the same question on the Biden plan too.
Sure. Sure. Okay. Yeah. The rescue plan did. I want to say it was for the state and local money. I want to say it was 3 or 4 years they had to spend it. I could have that wrong. It could be open forever, but I'm almost positive. Let me circle back and I'll shoot Jeff an email on that and get a firm answer on that. On the Biden plan or the infrastructure package, there isn't actual legislative text yet, but I think it's the intent that we've heard, kind of vocally from behind the scenes, is that it would be the infrastructure or the transportation portion of the Biden plan would be, is thought of to be over 5 years. So that money would have to go out. It wouldn't necessarily go out in chunks. I think state and locals could see, one-time money, but they would have 5 years to spend it all. So that's what we're hearing there. But yeah, let me circle back on the timeline on the ARP money. But I'm pretty sure it was 2024 was a date that rings in my mind is when they had to get that money out by.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Andrew. Dean, I've seen that we're joined by Mo Burr with TxDOT. I think that's Mo. And I know we'd referenced TxDOT earlier. Mo, is there anything that you wanted to add relative to Dean's presentation, if that is in fact the famous Mo Burr here?
Infamous. I'm not sure about famous.
Good morning, Mo.
Yeah. Good to see you twice in 3 days?
Absolutely. Thanks very much.
Yes,
we were
sir.
talking about the groundbreaking earlier.
Yes, sir. No, it was a pleasure as well. No, I think, we had discussions with Congresswoman Beth Van Duyne. She had a couple of town hall meetings. And one of the things that we asked her for and we pushed for, we always do that, not so much fair equity or for TxDOT to get or Texas to get a fair share back, but more about making sure that the formulas are up to date. The formulas that we use to divvy up the funds that you just showed, Dean, are based on the 2000 census. We all know how much Texas has grown in the last 20 years, and we're going to get 2 more congressional seats based on the 2020 census. The state is nowhere what it is today compared to what it was 20 years ago or 20 some years ago, and we feel like the formula should reflect that. And I think one thing we're arguing for is that instead of talking about Texas, we want to talk about the formulas, because we feel like that will get us a lot of national support, mainly because a lot of the states in the South, a lot of the states in the West are growing tremendously too. So if we can bring Florida and North Carolina and Georgia and Tennessee and Alabama and Missouri and Arizona and Texas, I mean, you'll have a lot more push and you have a lot more support if we can use the formula or talking about it from a formula perspective instead of a Texas perspective only. There's only 30 some of us in Congress, so we feel like that's a better way to argue it, and we feel like it's a just way of arguing it too. I hate the word fair, but it's more of a just way to approach it. So that's one argument. The second thing is we talked about shovel ready. I remember the days when we were doing ARA, and that was difficult. We had to have projects ready to go in 18 months, and that was a challenge. And I'm not saying, I know in the Dallas district we led the right projects, right? But I don't know about the rest of the state, and I don't know about the rest of the country. But no one wanted the money to go to waste. So did we, at the end of the day, did we really spend the money wisely? So in order for us not to put ourselves in that predicament again, one thing we asked for Congresswoman Beth Van Duyne is to have an opportunity to go for 3 to 4 years with those earmarks or the allocations. That way we really make sure that we let the right projects and not just let projects just to spend money. We statewide, we have a lot more grants these days to compete for federal funding, like infra grant and raise grant, which used to be the bill grant. The rules for them change every year, it seems like. I like to compete for that, I don't mind competition. But we historically, TxDOT or Texas has not been very successful. We've been successful in some, but not as successful compared to our population and our mileage on roadways and things like that. And so if we can go more to a formula-based allocation for us, that's always better. So that's always, from a federal perspective, those have always been our three priorities: updating the formulas, making sure that we have some adequate time to spend this money, whatever it might be, and then the last thing is make sure those formulas or those grants are a little bit more in line with really what's happening across the country. So that's all I got, Jeff.
Thanks, Bo. Appreciate that update, especially since I did not give you any advance warning that I'd be calling on you.
Sure, man. Anytime.
It looks like we've got time for one real quick question from Dev Rastogi. He's got another question for Dean.
Yeah, Dean, obviously we appreciate all the information about what's happening right now, but we know that the transportation funding is a big topic, and wondering about if you can share anything about the conversations that are happening with respect to gas tax increases, or vehicle miles traveled, and it seems like that's taking on a little bit more support than it has in the past, or if there's some hybrid, what's happening with those conversations.
Sure, great question. So you're right. I think they're more rhetoric and more discussion than I've ever seen is happening right now on user fees. I think in particular on the Republican side of the aisle, where there's honestly been some reticence over the years on some of that, or at least compared to the Democrats, but both parties have shied away from any discussion of user fees, to be frank. I mean, so right now, I think the gas tax is probably not going to happen. Just being frank, the President Biden's pledge not to raise taxes on anyone over or making under $400,000 a year. I think the gas tax is seen in contrast to that, and so that's we continue to push for any and all user fee sources, but just being honest, I'm not sure how that fits into that pledge, and that he would go on with anything like that. Now, VMT, I think you could see an opening there because you could do VMT-A is something that would take years, if not decades, to set up on every individual. So in reality, it's not going to happen anytime soon on individuals. But B, it also is something that you probably could do a little bit sooner on commercial vehicles and raise some substantial revenue that way. Either way, I think at the very least, you're going to see some sort of national pilot program put in place in the next reauthorization bill. If not, again, something more, whether it's starting to do commercial vehicle VMT, or putting there's been talk of using the federal fleet, whether it's USPS or I think there's close to 1 million federal vehicles. Putting a VMT system in place on those vehicles to help essentially have some sort of national system put in place. So there is a lot going on this discussion right now. I think there's again some opportunity to potentially do something on the commercial side and start bringing in revenue that way. But at the very least, I think we're going to see a national pilot on VMT included in the reauthorization proposals.
Thanks so much, Dean. Well, we're right up at our conclusion time, so we are very grateful to have had you here today to give us an update on everything that's happening in the transportation world from DC. As a token of our appreciation, we'll be making a donation in your name and the name of all of our speakers for this fiscal year to the Austin Street Shelter here in
cool.
Dallas. And really appreciate, especially you taking the time to join us from Disney World. And hope you get to enjoy a little bit of the park today and do some fun stuff.
Clearly they need better broadband down here, just like everywhere else. So yeah.
Great.
Sorry about that in the beginning, but no, thanks for having me and appreciate it, and happy to do it anytime. And like I said, hopefully we get together in person sometime soon.
Look forward to that, and save the date if you're interested and want to travel to Texas for our Transportation Crossroads conference. It's going to be on Friday, December 10th this year. We loved hearing from you. I think that was 2019 at the last in-person one. We went virtual last year, and we'll be going back to in-person again this year. So thank you very much for being a part of that too. I very quickly, I have to drop off about 9 a.m. to go to another meeting that I'm presenting at, but I do really quickly want to recognize or call on Brett Sebastian with GoRail. Brett had a very quick update that he wanted to provide with regard to some advocacy that they're doing. And then I'm also, Bob, if it's okay with you, I'll go ahead and make you the host of the meeting so that the network can continue when I have to drop off.
Sounds good.
So Brett, here you go.
Perfect. Well, I really do appreciate it. Dean, thank you very much for your presentation as well. That was really enlightening. For those who are unaware, I'm actually in the process of kind of spinning back up, leading the freight rail industry's advocacy efforts in Texas after being off for paternity for the past few months. So my exposure to the infrastructure package has basically been about as minimal as you can get in between baby world over the past little bit. So being able to kind of get a little bit of an in-depth briefing outside of what we're just looking at the freight rail industry has been, that was extremely helpful. So, thank you for that as well. But one of the reasons that I wanted to speak today is I'd actually reached out to Jeff and Ken coming back in about a project that the freight rail industry is working on in conjunction with this infrastructure package. What we're trying to do, just kind of playing off what Dean said about the markup that's coming on May 26th, we're trying to kind of make the congressional delegation aware of some of the freight rail industries, kind of their legislative concerns and their legislative priorities in relation to this package, just so it can inform their work a little bit. And really, we have about 5 main buckets that we're trying to really hit home with them, and that's restoring the Highway Trust Fund, improving partnership opportunities, such as increasing funding for highway rail grade crossing projects and discretionary grant programs, like Section 130 funding, grade separation projects, those types of issues. Ending modal inequity policies. We saw a lot of this in last year's Invest Act. This is policies like 2 crew mandates, whereas last year's Invest Act had a pretty kind of a trend line that pretty favorably embraced like autonomous vehicles and other industries, but put a 2 crew mandate on the freight rail system. If we're going to see those kinds of policies, they should at least be equitable across all different modes. Increasing Amtrak funding so that we can have a more robust passenger rail service. I know that's something that this group is pretty keen on continuing, as well as preserving balanced economic regulations such as the Staggers Rail Act of 1980, which the North Dallas Chamber actually signed on to a support letter last week. So it's a pretty broad-reaching letter. I had sent it to Jeff and Ken a few days ago. I believe the Policy Council has joined in on this as well, from what he told me yesterday afternoon. So we are excited to have the North Dallas Chamber involved in this, but I did want to provide an update and let the group know that that's kind of where the freight rail industry's priorities are aligning. I think in terms of the infrastructure package from kind of a 30,000 foot view, the industry is enthusiastic about that type of investment. They want to be involved to a certain degree, but the freight rail system is privately owned, operated, and maintained. And I think there's a reason that the bulk of the dollars that you're seeing going towards rail projects are in conjunction with passenger and urban transit and other kind of local transit and mobility programs, as opposed to going towards the actual freight rail industry. Because as I'm sure all of y'all are aware, the minute any private industry starts inviting in those public dollars is the minute you start seeing a lot of different policies that might not necessarily jive with what the specific industry is trying to do. So the freight rail industry is enthusiastic about what's happening, but wants to make its priorities known, trying to get that local buy-in from chambers like the North Dallas Chamber, North Texas Commission, state chambers, folks along those lines. If anyone is interested in having, joining in on this as well from kind of their private company standpoint, or just having their own personal name on it, feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat. More than happy to have those conversations and have more in-depth conversations, because I don't want to take up too much of this group's time. But I think that worked out pretty well, being able to kind of parlay that broad discussion that Dean had about, what we're looking at with this infrastructure package, how that's going to impact roads and bridges and civil engineering and the bulk of the work that this group does. But then also kind of being able to kind of give you all an update from the private freight rail standpoint as well, just to kind of be able to show you both sides of how these conversations are unfolding. So with that, I'm not going to take up any more of y'all's time. I know we're kind of a little bit past 9 o'clock. So I'll go ahead and pause there. If anyone has any questions, more than happy to entertain those, and I'll put my email in the chat right now.
Thanks, Brett. And yeah, we may want to connect with you later. So thanks for your contact info. I'm sure a lot of our firms will be interested in hearing more about what your organization will do. So thanks again. One other quick announcement: there is a meeting on May 19th at 10 a.m. that Jeff will host to kick off the planning for the Transportation Crossroads Conference. So hopefully everybody, all the sponsors, can make that. And that's all I had.